I can't begin to tell you how excited I am to be here. How wonderful it is to be here. I'm not going to take too much time. I'm liable to get kind of emotional. As anyone who knows me knows, I'm not a very emotional guy. But before we started a while ago, I was standing at the back and I just surveyed the audience. And you need to know, I have spoken at seminars before, if you could call them seminars, with as little as 5 people present. And to look out and to see over 300 people present was truly an emotional feeling and situation for me, and I actually shed a tear. I've been at this an awful long time. I'm one of the old geezers of the preterist movement. And I've been through a lot of wars. And I've never been so thrilled or more encouraged than I am right now. It is such a fantastic experience to be able to meet so many of you that I've never met face to face. I would like to ask you, how many of you watch morning musings?
Oh, yeah.
That is just absolutely incredible. How many of you watch preterist apologetics on Friday afternoon? There you go. Well, if you don't, let me encourage you to do that. Mike Sullivan and I do a program on Friday evening, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 o'clock, and it's on YouTube. And I got to tell you, Mike and I have way too much fun doing that. We just have an absolute ball. And people tell me, boy, you guys act like you're having a lot of time, a really good time. And I said, we're not acting at all. We love the Lord, and we love talking about the Word. Ain't no act to it. So tune in and enjoy that time with us. Now, I want to ask everyone to make sure that you meet my wonderful wife back at the book table. She has put up with me for 55 years. Now, mind you, she robbed the cradle. You understand that. I think you know. But she is truly my rock. She's my inspiration. And best friend I've got in this world. When things were really, really tough during times of real persecution, there was one person who stood by me, and that was her. And to end my preliminaries, and there's a whole lot more that I would like to say, but I won't. We really, really owe a special thanks to Zach and his congregation, and for his partner in crime, for sponsoring this get-together. So, where'd you guys go? Where'd Zach? Where did they go? They made their getaway. Oh, there they are. Yeah, they're sitting right back there. I'm sorry. They've done a marvelous job, obviously, of organizing, of advertising, and I just want to say just a little bit more before I get into my lesson. People ask me, well, why do you think, in fact, Mike Sullivan and I were talking about this recently. He said, Don, why do you think 300 folks are coming? He said, do you think half of them are from Zach's congregation? I said, I don't have any idea. I don't know how large the congregation is. Well, I asked Zach yesterday how large or how many people from the congregation would be here, and he said, probably about 20, 21, I don't know. I go, oh, that means the rest of you folks are newbies. That is to say, you're not from here local. And that speaks eloquently of how the message of covenant eschatology is growing. And that is amazing. And I will say, just let me add this as proof of the growth. One of the Facebook pages that I have is Preterist Doctrine. About a year ago, maybe slightly more than that, we had something like 800 members of Preterist Doctrine. Just within the last year, that has jumped to over 3,000 and growing. There is one Preterist Facebook page, and the owner of that page recently contacted me and asked me if I would please go ahead and post my videos that I produce on his page. So I said, sure, what is it? So he gave me a link, and it's Fulfilled Prophecies. They currently have, as of yesterday, 13,400 members. Now, folks, it's only been about 2 years ago that you were hard-pressed to find a Facebook page, Preterist page, that had over 1,000. I can name half a dozen right now that have 1,500 to 3,000. And the reason for that is because the truth is marching. It is making inroads everywhere. And that's because folks just like you, speaking to your neighbors and your friends, sharing the word. I don't know that I'll live to see this. I would love to see the day in which there was a crowd of 500, 700, 1,000 people gathered to hear the word of the faithfulness of God in keeping His word. Go to work. All right. Like I said, there's a whole lot more that I would like to say that I will not. The mind can only absorb what the seat can endure, so I'll do my best. I will give you a word of warning here. My nickname used to be Motor Mouth. I'm probably going to revert to those days. However, my PowerPoints will be available for everything that you're not able to catch verbally. So Zach has them. With that said, I want to share with you a different approach to the idea of the end of the millennium. I don't have to tell you, in any study of biblical eschatology, the millennium is one of the most controversial and perplexing doctrines in all of Christianity. It has been and continues to be the source. I'm going to give you what I consider to be a slightly different approach to determining the time of the ending of the millennium. Now, just as a real brief intro, I believe the millennium was a period of approximately 40 years that terminated just immediately before AD 70. In my approach, I'm going to approach it through the prism of three related subjects. Number one, the millennium and the topic of the war. The subject of the war is found in the book of Revelation in no less than 4 different texts. Number two, I'll be investigating the subject of the war through the prism of Daniel chapter 9, which mentions and discusses the war. And then, time permitting, and Dave Curtis may be sitting back there. Boy, I hope Preston doesn't get to this because he's going to be talking about the feast days. But I hope I at least get to see or discuss a little bit. And by the way, I've just got to tell you how great it is to see Dave again. He's sitting back there with his lovely wife. Dave and I haven't been able to work together for what, Dave, 4 years, 5? Something like that. And so it's absolutely wonderful to be able to renew friendships, to see him again, just enjoying that so much. So this is how I'm going to approach the subject of the millennium. When did it end? So let's begin our subject, and I'm going to begin at the ending. And I'm going to work back, then I'm going to go back again, all right? So to begin our study of the war and the ending of the millennium, we go to Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8. Now, after the 1,000 years were finished or expired, here we are at the end of the millennium, right? Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the kingdoms or the nations which are in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle. Now, in the Greek, this is literally ton polemon. It is the war. It's not simply gathering to battle. And you need to understand that because it's absolutely critical. To gather them together to the war. So what does that mean? We have, in Revelation chapter 20, we have the war, we have the parousia of Christ, Revelation chapter 22, 10 to 12, and we have, of course, the judgment, and following that we have, at the judgment, we have the resurrection. Following that, of course, we have the new creation. Now, I want you to know something. This is a tiny bit technical. I'm not a great Greek scholar by any means, but I do know what an anaphoric article is. An anaphoric article is by far the preponderant use of the definite article in the Greek language, according to Daniel Wallace, and is beyond the basics of Greek grammar. And what an anaphoric article is, as stated as simply as possible, is a writer or a speaker introduces a subject. He continues his discussion of that subject, and then to refer to the reader or the listener back to the subject that he has discussed earlier, he uses the definite article. So that means in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8, when it says to gather the kings of the earth for the war, it means that the writer is referring the reader back to a previous reference to the war, which naturally raises the question, okay, where do we find a previous reference to the war in the book of Revelation? Well, we find it in Revelation chapter 19 and verse 19. We find it in Revelation chapter 16, verse 17 and following. And even though the specific term, ton polemon, is not used in Revelation chapter 6, 12 and following, the idea, the subject is in fact there. And I would suggest to you that it's the beginning referent for the war that Revelation 16, Revelation 19, and Revelation chapter 20 is building upon. So what I'm saying here is that a study of the war in Revelation and prophecy will prove for us that the end of the millennium had to have occurred in the first century and terminated circa AD 70. Now, interestingly enough, few studies on the millennium focus on the subject of the war. In my research down through the years, I have found very, very few, matter of fact, I hadn't found even one, that focus on the subject of the war as it relates to the end of the millennium. By the way, there's another subject in the book of Revelation that is never discussed in the subject or the study of the end of the millennium, and that's the subject of the passing of heaven and earth. Do you realize that in the book of Revelation, heaven and earth is destroyed, that is, creation is destroyed at least 3 times? For those who see the book of Revelation as reading consecutively, temporally consecutively, to be fulfilled within a 7-year period, it seems to me that's a little troublesome. You're going to have creation destroyed 3 times in 7 years? Oh, wow. That's amazing. No one believes that, but it's necessarily true if you read it consecutively. Okay, I'll just drop that. Food for thought. So let's go back to Revelation 19:19, which is the antecedent reference to the war from Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8. In verse 19 and following, John said, I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make the war. It's not to make battle, it's to make the war against him and who sat on the horse and against his army. Then the beast was captured, with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worship the image. These 2 are cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. Now watch. We have in Revelation 19 the exact same precise tenets that we find in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8. We have the gathering of the kings of the earth for the war, for the war. We have the destruction of the beast and the false prophet cast into the lake of fire. We have the parousia, and we even have the new creation, because the old creation is shaken and destroyed. So again, these are patently the same constituent elements as chapter 20. Well, if they're the same identical elements, pardon me, and if Revelation chapter 20 is using the anaphoric article to refer right back there to chapter 19, then that means that chapter 19 is dealing with the end of the millennium as well. Why? Well, because Revelation 20 is dealing with the end of the millennium. That's what it says. After the millennium, or the 1,000 years, is ended, you have the following constituent elements. Everyone follow me on this? So, what do we find in Revelation chapter 16? That's another reference back. Revelation 20, anaphoric article, chapter 19, referring us back to another previous reference to the war. I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. Where do we find the false prophet? Chapter 19. Same constituent elements. For they are the spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the earth and the whole world to gather them to the battle. No, the war. The war. Of that great day, now I want you to notice, you'll see that I have it underlined here, of the great day of God Almighty. Now, what I'm about to embark on some of it may sound a little bit redundant, because we're going to find the same terminology that is used by the writers. And the reason I'm giving this same terminology redundantly is so that we can really hone in and focus on what these different passages are sharing with us. They are not talking about different days of the Lord at all. There is but one great day of God's wrath in the book of Revelation. It is talked about over and over. You know, Joel did a great job a while ago of showing us the nature of the day of the Lord, that it is not an earth-burning, time-ending event. Okay? Guess what? We're going to find that. We see that in the book of Revelation itself when we examine what the war is all about. The war in the book of Revelation is the great day of God Almighty. It is the great day of God's wrath. It's the day of the kingdom. It's the day of the resurrection. On and on. So what do we find in Revelation chapter 16 that we have just read? We have exactly like Revelation chapter 19, just exactly like Revelation chapter 20, we have the gathering of the kings for the war. We have the beast and the prophet. And by the way, we have something else introduced in chapter 16 that everybody likes to talk about, and everybody tells us, oh, Armageddon, it's just around the corner. Everybody knows it's just around the corner. Nope, sorry, it's not. I don't know about you, but I think it's some really, really, real cool, good news that Armageddon is not just around the corner. Amen? Can I get an amen on that? Okay, so at the time of the war, this is Armageddon. See, this is terminology that is using slightly different terminology to refer to the same identical event. Now notice, it's also called the great day of the Lord. But now, we are told something very specific about this great day of the Lord in Revelation chapter 16. It is the time of the judgment of a city that is called Babylon. See, we're not told that in chapter 19. We are in chapter 18, but chapter 19 doesn't. But now we have this additional information that tells us in Revelation chapter 16 that this great day of the Lord, which is, by the way, the great day of God's wrath, now we have a slightly different tune to the same identical event. So what I said a few moments ago is very important to keep in mind, and that is that we have slightly different terminology, all speaking of the same identical event. Once we get that in our mind, then we can understand that Revelation is truly recapitulatory. It's giving us the same story over and over and over again. We do not, like our dispensational friends do, read it consecutively, and they wind up having 3, 4, or 5 resurrections, or 3 or 4 comings of the Lord. And that's just not that way in the book of Revelation when we understand slightly different terminology to refer to the same identical event. So, guess what we have in Revelation chapter 6? We have an additional constituent element that is not mentioned specifically in chapter 17 or 18 or 19 or chapter 20, but it's given to us here, I wouldn't say cryptically, but it's given to us in one word, and that is a Greek word that is translated as remembered. Babylon the Great was remembered before God, and this is really a fascinating study. The word that is used or translated as remembered is taken from a Hebrew word that means bring to mind covenantally. It is not, oh, drat, I've got to remember to go to the grocery store because my wife told me to do that. Has nothing to do with that. Now, it can in a certain context, because context is the only way that you know. But this is the word that we find over and over in the Old Testament. God remembered His covenant with Abraham. God remembered His covenant with Israel. God remembered And when God remembered something, it was either wonderful news because someone was righteous and obedient and God was remembering his covenant to bless them, or if God remembered his covenant, as in Leviticus chapter 26 or Deuteronomy 28 to 30, in a negative sense, somebody's in an awful lot of trouble. They're about to be judged. They're about to be destroyed. So it's incredibly important to realize in Revelation chapter 16, verse 19, when it says Babylon was remembered before God, it is in the context of Revelation chapter 16 and verse 6, which tells us that Babylon was about to be destroyed. Why? Because she had killed the prophets. Now, in my book, Who is This Babylon, back there, and I think it's already almost sold out. Thank you so very much. But I document how the term, the prophets, is used, if I remember correctly, it's either 88 or 95 times in the New Testament. When it is used without a contextual qualifier, it invariably refers to Old Covenant prophets. There is no contextual qualifier in Revelation chapter 16 to tell us that these are New Covenant prophets. So what that means is, as I was starting to say, when in the New Testament we find the term the prophets used without any kind of a contextual qualifier, it's Old Testament prophets. So ask yourself the question, if perchance you take the late date writing of the book of Revelation, let me get my antenna in. I got hearing aids the other day, about 3 weeks ago, and I absolutely hate them. Absolutely hate them. And I really hate getting old, even worse, but you know, that's the way things are. So anyway, when you look at this concept of remembered and Babylon killing the prophets, you got to ask yourself the question, if you take the late date of the book of Revelation being written under Domitian, name one Old Testament prophet that Rome or Domitian ever killed. I dare you. I invite you. I challenge you. You can't. Only one city in the Bible is ever named and accused of being guilty of shedding the blood of an Old Covenant prophet. Period. End of story. What's that old saying? Mic drop? I better not drop that. But you get the point, right? Now, you've got a city here that killed Old Covenant prophets. Only Jerusalem killed Old Covenant prophets. Stephen said to Jerusalem inhabitants, Acts chapter 7, which of the prophets have you not slain? Which one? They knew. We need to know. So you have a city here that killed the Old Testament prophets and that was being remembered by God to bring wrath on her because she had killed the prophets. That's covenantal wrath, folks. That's Deuteronomy chapter 28 to 30. That's Deuteronomy 32, by the way, of what was going to happen to Israel in her last days. So Revelation chapter 16 has some markers for us that helps us to identify, number one, who Babylon is, therefore what Armageddon is all about, therefore what the great day of the Lord is all about, therefore what the war is to be identified as. And it's the time of the judgment on Babylon, the city where the Lord was crucified, Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. It is that city, to reiterate, not to be redundant, but to reiterate and drive the point home, it is the city that killed the prophets, and only one city is ever accused of that. So we have so far 3 references to the war. Each one of these references contains the exact same precise constituent elements. The gathering of the kings of the earth for the war. We have the coming of the Lord. In Revelation chapter 16, we also have the avenging of the blood of the prophets. So let's go on just a little bit. And when we see, as I've already stated, that the war is clearly, I don't see a way out of this personally, but when we see that the war in Revelation 16, 19, and 20 is exactly the same war, and we see what this is all about in regard to the destruction and judgment of Babylon, it seems to me that we're forced to a conclusion that the millennium, i.e. Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8, that is the end of the millennium, is somehow related to the judgment of Babylon. Well, let's go on. These constituent elements are identical, as I've already noted. So, since the war in Revelation 20 comes at the end of the millennium, and this means that in Revelation 16 and Revelation chapter 19 also speak of the end of the millennium. In other words, if the war is in Revelation 16, 19, and 20 is the same, then since Revelation 20, verse 8, is the war that occurs at the end of the millennium, then that invariably and undeniably means that Revelation 16 and Revelation chapter 19 is dealing with the end of the millennium, the war. If not, why not? Where is the distinction? So once again, if we can identify the time and the framework for the war, we can identify the time for the end of the millennium. Now, I'm almost through with my introduction. So let's take a look at the doctrine of Armageddon. I have a little book back there entitled Blast from the Past, The Truth About Armageddon. Real simple little book, and I believe, and I've had any number of dispensational people, bless their heart, read it and say it changed their life. I think it's that powerful. I think it's that reassuring. In Revelation chapter 16, the war is Armageddon. So let me say this. Armageddon was in the first century. How do I know that? Well, in Revelation chapter 7 and Revelation chapter 14, John sees 144,000 who out of the 12 tribes of Israel. They are the righteous remnant of Old Covenant Israel. John in Revelation chapter 7, when he is shown the 144,000, he asks, or the angel asks him, who are these? And he says, I don't know. And the angel says, these are those who have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb, and they have come out of the great tribulation. So who are the 144,000? Well, again, they are the righteous remnant out of Old Covenant Israel. And in chapter 14, we find out a little bit more information about them. This is recapitulation. Revelation 7, 144,000. Revelation 14, 144,000. Once again, John is asked, who are these? And he said, I don't know. And the angel says, these are the first fruits redeemed to God from among men. Anybody know what first fruits means? I can tell you what, I know what first fruits doesn't mean. It doesn't mean 55 or 60 or 70 generations later. When we look at James, and James said, James chapter 1 verse 18, speaking of God, who of his own will begat he us by the will of God, or by the word of God, that we might be a kind of first fruits unto him. What does that mean? It means they're the first Jewish Christians converted in the first century. In Hebrews chapter 12, I got to tell you what, folks, Revelation chapter 12 is just unbelievably powerful. I would really like to get on my soapbox and talk about it, but I won't. But in Revelation chapter 12, as the writer says, you have not come to the mountain that could not be touched, and they had fire and brimstone, and so much of it as an animal touched that it should be thrust through the spear. You have come to Mount Zion. Now, if you're a good, faithful Jew in the first century, and you know anything at all about your Old Covenant eschatological prophecies and how they are focused on Zion. The kingdom would be established on Zion. The resurrection would be on Zion. Salvation would be on Zion. Every eschatological tenet you can even possibly begin to think about or study is focused on Zion. And so for the writer of the book of Hebrews to write, you have come to Mount Zion, you think that would not have been one of the most thrilling things that they could have imagined? It's got to thrill their soul. But that's not what all he said. You have come to the heavenly Jerusalem. That's Mount Zion. To the church of the firstborn ones. Well, I wonder if the firstborn ones of Hebrews 12 might possibly have a relationship to the firstborn ones of Revelation 7 and Revelation chapter 14. J. Stuart Russell, in his book, The Parousia, believed that Revelation was written prior to Hebrews, and that Hebrews was drawing its imagery directly from Revelation. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I know they both talk about the same thing, for sure, and I know Hebrews was written before the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. But the very concept that the writer of Hebrews says, you have come to the church of the living God and to the firstborn ones. That tells us that he's writing to the 144,000 of Revelation chapter 14, to the very first generation of Christians. All right? So watch this. In Revelation 7 and 14, the 144,000 come out of the Great Tribulation. In Revelation 14, 1 to 4, the 144,000 are the first fruits of those who are redeemed to God from among men. They are the first Israelites converted to the Lord. To reiterate, first fruit does not mean later fruit. It doesn't mean 50 generations later. Now this agrees with Jesus' statement in Matthew chapter 24, 15 to 34, that I won't take the time to go into, but here's the point. If the 144,000 were the first generation of Christians, and if the 144,000 came out of the Great Tribulation, i.e. Armageddon, then that means Armageddon was in the first century. I like 1 + 1 = 4. You know what I mean? Do you get the point on this? Armageddon is not in our future, folks. It is in our past. Thank our God. All right, so let's go on and develop this a little bit more. In chapter 16, what do we have? We have the war, we have Armageddon, and we have the great day of the Lord that is tied to the judgment of this city called Babylon. She is to be judged for killing the prophets, as we've already seen. She is where the Lord was crucified, Revelation chapter 11 and verse 8. She is killing, and her cup of sin was full for killing the apostles and prophets of the Lord, Revelation chapter 18, verses 20 and through 24. And she said, all the righteous blood on the earth. Revelation chapter 18, 20 through 24 is a virtual citation of Jesus' statement in Matthew chapter 23. As he castigates the Jews standing in the temple, and he said, upon you will come all of the righteous blood of all the righteous shed on the earth. All the righteous blood shed on the earth. Revelation chapter 18, Babylon shed all the righteous blood shed on the earth. We have two cities guilty of shedding all the righteous blood on the earth. Now this is really bothersome if you place Revelation under the reign of Domitian, 95 to 98 AD. Scholarship is increasingly questioning the very idea that Domitian ever persecuted the church in the first place. That's being called into question repeatedly. But even if he did persecute the church to any extent, we only have 2 or 3 instances that could possibly be pointed to, and they're highly dubious. But we're supposed to believe that in the very, very, very few questionable examples of persecution, and again, that can be basically thrown out as persecution by Domitian, we're supposed to believe that the city of Rome is to be held accountable for all the righteous blood shed on the earth and filling up the measure of their sin. And as Jesus said, it took Jerusalem literally centuries to fill up their measure of their sin, but that's not all. This book of Revelation tells us this great city is also the harlot. The word that is translated as harlot in the book of Revelation is the equivalent of the word that is used in the Old Covenant. And a scholar by the name of Sebastian Smolars has written a great book, The Metaphor of Harlotry, in the book of Revelation, and he's pointed this out. The word that is translated as harlot in the Old Testament is from a Hebrew word. Am I messing up here? Anyway, in the Old Testament is from a word that is used 91 times in the Old Testament. 86 of the 91 times it is used of a wife that has broken the marriage covenant. Now, unless John is breaking precedent, unless John is breaking the usage of the word harlotry in the book of Revelation, and he's not, then that means that this great city, Babylon, in the book of Revelation, had been in a marital relationship, or was in a marital relationship, and had broken the marriage bond. Okay, was Rome ever in a marriage relationship, or any kind of a covenant relationship with Yahweh? Nope. Well, that kind of eliminates Revelation being about Rome being the harlot city, doesn't it? The evidence for Rome being Babylon, in my estimation, in my humble opinion, is virtually non-existent. I was raised believing it was, but I'd never studied the subject on my own. The fact is that no other city in history ever did or could be accused of doing the things that the book of Revelation lays at the feet of Babylon. No other city, period. Now, I don't care who you want to identify as Babylon. If she didn't do what Revelation says that Babylon did, you've got the wrong Babylon. I was doing a radio show some years, a talk show, call-in show out of Florida. And this guy calls in and castigated me pretty strongly. He said, I'm telling you right now, Babylon was the literal city of Babylon in Iraq. And I said, well, sir, I appreciate you calling in, but I think you're wrong. He said, no, you're the one that's wrong. I said, well, okay, if that's the case, I said, the book of Revelation tells us that Babylon, whoever it was, killed the prophets. I said, I would like for you to name one Old Testament prophet that Babylon in Iraq ever killed. And he said, Shadrach, Meshach. No, they weren't killed, were they? Well, Daniel. No, Daniel wasn't killed, was he? And I said, you're right. Daniel wasn't killed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not killed. They tried, but they couldn't do it. And they have to give the guy credit. He said, you know, I never thought about this. Thank you very much. Click. Okay. So let me reiterate. No other city did or could possibly be accused or described as doing what Babylon of Revelation had done and was guilty of doing at the very time that it was written, other than Old Covenant Jerusalem. Thus, since the war, okay, that's our subject, since the war is connected to the time of the judgment of this city that did all of these things, then that means that the war at the end of the millennium is tied to the judgment of Old Covenant Jerusalem. Well, let's go on and let's look at that just a little bit closer. I hope you can read that. Okay, the great day of God in Revelation 16, Revelation 19, and as we shall see in Revelation chapter 6, the great day of God is the day of God's wrath. It is Armageddon. It is the war in Revelation chapter 16. Okay, now follow me now. Same terminology, slightly different look. The great day of the Lord is the time of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. This is where Revelation chapter 16 comes in. It's also where Revelation chapter 6 comes in very, very strongly. So, the great day of the Lord is the time of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs, Revelation chapter 16:6. At the judgment of Babylon, Revelation 16:19, at what? The war. You see how the war is tied inextricably with all of these references to the great day of the Lord, the great day of God's wrath, etc., etc. Now, once again, the war in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8 equals the war of chapter 19 and verse 9 because of the anaphoric article, which in turn is the war in Revelation chapter 16, 13 and following, which is going to refer us back to another reference to war, but it's the great day of God's wrath. Revelation chapter 16 is not going to leave us hanging when it wants to discuss the great day of God's wrath or the war. Now, I want you to think inwardly. Since Revelation 16, Revelation 18, Revelation chapter 19, and I suggest Revelation chapter 20, deals with the time of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs, what did Jesus have to say about the time and the context, the framework of the avenging of all the blood of all the martyrs shed upon the earth? Anybody remember? I bet you do. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and kills those who are sent unto thee. How often I would have gathered you together as a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you would not. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. So, Jesus posited the avenging of all the blood of all the righteous, including the prophets, at the AD 70 judgment of Israel, Matthew 23, 29 to 37. Thus, since Revelation 16, 18, 19, and 20, and as we shall see momentarily, Revelation chapter 11 likewise posits the time of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs, when at the judgment of Babylon, then unless you can divorce Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8, the great day of God's wrath, from all these previous references to the great day of the Lord, the great day of God's wrath, then all of these previous references to the time of the avenging of the martyrs is tied with Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8, the war, which is itself for the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. And all of that means the end of the millennium was at the judgment of Jerusalem in AD 70. Now, I said we're going to take a look at another passage in Revelation chapter 11, 15 to 19. And, you know, Mike Sullivan and I have talked about this passage over and over and over. We absolutely love this text. And he pointed out that Doug Wilson, in his book, When the Man Comes Around, I don't want to be unkind at all here. I don't want to be disrespectful. But in his book, Revelation on When the Sun Comes Around, his comments on Revelation chapter 11, 15 and following, he gave away the dog, the farm, the dog, the cat, the gerbil. He gave it all away. Because you know why? He said Revelation chapter 11, 15 and 19 was fulfilled in AD 70. Once you admit that, folks, I'm sorry. You have no grounds whatsoever for a futurist eschatology, period. And so as Mike observed, and I'm not laughing at Doug, he's caught up in a very serious case of cognitive dissonance. Revelation 11, 15 and following, the seventh angel sounded. By the way, seventh angel, there's six previous trumpets, and the seventh trumpet is the last trumpet. When did Paul say the resurrection would take place? At the last trumpet. I wonder if there's any correspondence here. Of course there is. So, the seventh angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders who sat before God on their thrones fell on their faces and worshiped God, saying, we give you thanks, O Lord God Almighty, the one who is, who was, and who is to come, because you have taken your great power and reigned. The nations were angry, and your wrath has come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged, that they should reward your servants, the prophets and saints, and those who fear your name, small and great. Now watch this. I want you to hang on to this. And on those who destroy the earth. Hang on to that. What we have here, folks, is the answer to the prayer of the martyrs in Revelation chapter 6, 9 to 11. I hope you have your Bibles. I hope you'll have it open. I'll try to have it open here in a minute. But Revelation chapter 11 is chronicling for us the fulfillment, the answer of the prayer of the martyrs under the altar. John says, Revelation chapter 6, at the opening of the fifth seal, he said, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they had, crying out, how long, O Lord, holy and true, do you not avenge us on those who are on the earth? And they were given white robes and told, rest for a little while. And catch this. Catch the power of this, maybe? Until your fellow brethren and saints who should be slain as they were should be fulfilled. Okay? Martyrs filling up the measure of martyrs. And they've only got to wait for a little while. So what do we have? We have the great day of God's wrath in verse 12 and following. We'll get to that momentarily. And matter of fact, let me just, I don't remember if I did or not, to be honest about it. No, I didn't do that. So let me turn over here, and I didn't bring my glasses. Boy, getting old is the pits. Okay, what's the answer to the prayer of the saints? It's Revelation chapter 6, 12 and following. I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth of hail, and the moon became like blood. Boy, if you're paying attention to Joel's lesson, that really sounds like familiar language, doesn't it? But as he demonstrated so powerfully, that language never spoke of an end of time, end of the cosmos event, period. Okay. And the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved away. Well, let's see. Creation is shaken. Revelation 16, creation is shaken. Revelation 19, creation is shaken. Revelation chapter 20, creation is shaken and removed. Same stuff. Okay. And the kings of the earth, the great man, the rich man, the commanders, the mighty man, every slave and every free man hid himself in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains, rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come, and who can abide, or who can stand at his coming? So the answer to the prayer of the martyrs is going to be the great day of God's wrath. Okay? And it would be the time, you know, you have epiphany moments down through the years, right? And I was reading Revelation chapter 6 years and years ago, and actually I had started in Isaiah chapter 2 and come forward to the language, and it suddenly struck me, okay, wait a minute, you got men running to the hills at the day of the Lord, hiding in the caves, crying to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of the Lord. What? Do you suppose in the traditional view of the day of the Lord, we would have time, I'd have time? Honey, the day of the Lord is here today. And you might throw some things in the car and see if we can gather up a few friends and head to the hills. Because it's the day of the Lord. I thought the day of the Lord was supposed to be over in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. Is that not problematic? Would anyone have any possibility to run to the hills on the day of the Lord? You see, this is a failure, as some of us like to point out repeatedly. This is a gross failure to appreciate the nature of Hebraic thought, Hebraic culture. The idea of running to the hills was language taken directly out of times of war. When an invading army was coming into your land and you knew it was coming, and so you literally ran to the hills. You find this in the book of Judges. Running to the hills, hiding in the caves. We have no justification whatsoever for taking this language to refer to an end of time. It's just not there. Okay, so Revelation 6, we have the great day of God's wrath to avenge the martyrs by judgment on those on the earth. And what is it at? It's at the shaking of creation, as I've already pointed out. Now, this language of Revelation chapter 6, 12 and following is taken directly from Isaiah chapter 2 through 4. Here's what I'm going to skip over this, the rest of this right here, and hope to bring it home in the next chart or two. What we have in Revelation 6, 17 through 20 is the following. The martyrs are told to rest for a little while until the number of the brethren to be slain would be fulfilled. And that would be in the judgment of those who dwell on the earth. Everybody remember that? On those who dwell on the earth. Now they would be avenged at the great day of God's wrath. Revelation chapter 12, or 6, 12 and following. But wait. They would be avenged at the time of the war. So the great day of God's wrath is the time of the war. When does the war take place in Revelation? At the end of the millennium. Now watch, in Revelation chapter 17, this city Babylon, Revelation chapter 17 and verse 6, John said, I saw this harlot, I saw this woman holding a golden cup full of what? The blood of the saints and of the martyrs of Christ. Wait a minute, that's Revelation chapter 6. Rest for a little while until the fellow brethren who should be slain as they were should be fulfilled. What did Revelation chapter 11 say? At the great day of God's wrath, your wrath has come, the nations are angry, and it's the time to judge the living, it's the time to reward the dead. and to destroy those who dwell on the earth. What did the martyrs pray for? Vengeance on their persecutors who dwelt on the earth. So in Revelation chapter 11, we have the judgment, the answer to the prayer of the martyrs on those who dwell on the earth. And in Revelation chapter 17, we have the cup of the martyrs' blood now full, just exactly like Revelation chapter 6 foretold. Not only that, in Revelation chapter 18 and verse 1, we are told that the city Babylon, her sin was reaching to heaven. That's a Hebrew idiom, meaning, guess what? The measure of her sin was being filled up. So what follows Revelation chapter 18? Chapter 19 says, in the war, we have the judgment of Babylon, who is the persecutor. And it's the answer to the prayer of the martyrs of Revelation chapter 6. Now, I make no apology. I've been ridiculed for this, but I think Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 12 and other passages as well, including Revelation chapter 11, I believe the great serpent, the great devil in Revelation chapter 12 is none other than Old Covenant Israel, Jerusalem. If you want to say it's the devil being personified, I don't have a problem with that. But it's still the devil, the great adversary of God, the one persecuting his saints, to be destroyed at the great day of God's wrath, the great day of the Lord, and what have you. So once again, Revelation chapter 19 is the war and the judgment of Babylon, the persecutor, the prayer of the saints being answered. This means that the judgment of Babylon at the coming of the Lord in the war, guess what, was only a little while after Revelation chapter 6, because that's what it says, the great day of God's wrath, the great day of the Lord, when men would run to the hills, is that day. Now then, I mentioned Isaiah chapter 2 through 4. Very hurriedly go through this. And mind you, I'm speaking figuratively here, but if I run out of time, somebody throw a book at me. Figuratively. But Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, this set of these chapters are some of these chapters that just reached up and just hit me beside the head years and years ago, probably 35 years ago. They continue to be a source of incredible study and fascination and fulfillment. In Isaiah chapter 2 through 4, we have what is known, it is truly a key Old Testament prophecy of the last days. It shall come to pass in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the tops of the hills and glorified on the tops of the mountains. Many people shall come and say, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, for he will teach us of his ways and we walk in his paths. This is the establishment of the Messianic kingdom. It's the establishment of the Messianic temple. Well, guess what? In Revelation chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, and Revelation 2, 19 and 20, in this great day of the Lord, which is identified for us, what would happen? Men would, first of all, the Lord would rise up to shake the earth mightily. Let's see, in Revelation we've seen the earth being shaken how many times? 3, 4 times? Okay. But not only is it the great day of the Lord in the last days, it is the great day of the Lord, guess what? When men would run to the mountains, hide in the caves, call on the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of the Lord. Now, I got to tell you what, folks, Revelation chapter 6 is not the only passage in the New Testament that draws directly on Isaiah chapter 2. Jesus quoted it precisely in Luke 23, 28 to 31, in a passage that virtually all scholars apply to AD 70. Paul directly quoted from it in the Septuagint in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, 9 and 10, to talk about the impending judgment of the persecutors of the saints. Now, if Jesus applied Isaiah 2, 19 to 21 to AD 70, what right do we today, or any modern commentator, have to say, oh, well, yeah, that's how Jesus applied it, but that's not what it meant in Paul, or that's not what it meant in Revelation? But that's what scholars often do, because to admit to the unity of these passages is too overwhelming. And I mean no disrespect whatsoever to scholarship. I appreciate it tremendously. But it's disturbing sometimes the lengths to which some scholars will go to negate the inspiration of Scripture. Okay. In chapter 3, verse 1, and what you have to do when you're reading Isaiah chapter 2 through 4 is pay attention to the little term. I've got it underlined in my Bible over and over and over. In that day. Guess what it does? It gives you, that's a reference to the antecedent discussion, right? In that day. Well, in what day? In that day, it would be a time of famine, of water, and of bread in Jerusalem and in Judea. So the day of the Lord, which is supposed to be over in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, is a time of famine. That doesn't work out real well either, does it? Not only that, in Isaiah chapter 3 and verse 13, it would be the day in which the Lord would rise to judge the leaders of his people. In chapter 3, verse 24 and 25, Mike had it in one of his charts. It is a time in which the men of Israel would fall by the edge of the sword. In Luke chapter 21 and verse 24, Jesus made a direct echo of that passage in a discussion which virtually everyone admits is a discussion of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. So here we have Jesus in Luke chapter 23, 28 to 31, applying Isaiah to the impending judgment of Jerusalem. And in chapter 21, he draws once again from Isaiah 2 through 4. And what are we supposed to apply it to? Oh, I don't know, the end of time, baby. No, not the end of time. That would break the continuity in the context. Well, in chapter 4 and verse 1, once again, in that day, it is the time of the coming of the glorious branch of the Lord. That beautiful, glorious thing, as the Hebrew expresses it, and it's the branch of the Lord, it's the Messiah. But what do we find in verses 4 through 5? In that day, the Lord shall purge the blood guilt from Jerusalem by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of fire. What is it? It's the time of the avenging of the martyrs. In the last day, in the day of the Lord, which is the time in which Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword, which is the time in which the Lord would rise to shake the earth mightily, when men would run to the hills, hide in the caves, etc., etc. We have here a parallel chart between Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, Revelation 6, Revelation 16, and Revelation 19 through 20. All right? Isaiah 2 through 4 is obviously a prophecy of the last days, just like virtually everyone admits Revelation chapter 6, 16, 19, and following is a prophecy of the last days. In Revelation 6, John quotes verbatim from Isaiah. Now, if we admit that Isaiah and its prophecy of the last days, day of the Lord, is a time of judgment on Jerusalem and Judea, what do we have to do with Revelation chapter 6? Don't we have to admit that's the same thing too? If not, why not? Where's the evidence for it? But not only that, in these last days, the Lord would rise to shake the earth mightily. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 19 to 21. So what does he do in Revelation chapter 6, 9 through 11? He shakes the earth. What does he do in Revelation chapter 16? He shakes the earth. What does he do in chapter 20? He shakes the earth. Then we have, obviously, the time of war. Now, the term, the war, some translations, as a matter of fact, several translations render it as the war in Isaiah. Some translations do not. The definite article does not appear. However, if we believe in the analogy of Scripture, if we believe in the harmony of Scripture, then when we understand that Isaiah is predicting the last days, day of the Lord, and we find the New Testament writers quoting from Isaiah, then are we not talking about the same, the war? That's the question of hermeneutic that I would ask. So, we have the time of the war for the vindication of the martyrs. Isaiah chapter 4, verse 4, just like Revelation 16, or 6, just like Revelation 16, just like Revelation chapters 19 through 20. Now then, I said, we're going to talk about Daniel 9 and the end of the millennium. That's why I said a few moments ago that I'm just about through with my introduction. What I'm about to share with you is, to me, some of the most convincing stuff that I have ever produced or that I have read. Standing between Isaiah and Revelation, we find Daniel chapter 9. After the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with the flood. And until the end of... Now, this is in the Septuagint, you understand, but it's also in the Masoretic text, as I understand it. To the end of the war, desolations are determined. So here is Daniel chapter 9 making a prophecy and prediction about the ultimate end of Old Covenant Israel, her final glorious eschatological fate, and it is about the war. I wonder if Revelation has changed the subject, in spite of the fact that Revelation is about the fulfillment of all things written and foretold by the prophets, Revelation chapter 10, 6, and 7. Okay. Till the end of the war, desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the week of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined. So what do we have? In Daniel chapter 9, we have the judgment of Jerusalem in the war, and as virtually all scholars admit, except those who reject it as messianic, that destruction would be for killing Jesus. After the 62nd or 69th week, that is, in the 70th week, Messiah shall be cut off. And then what do you find immediately after the judgment, the killing of Messiah? You have the judgment of Jerusalem. Any good Jew would understand this judgment that is following is coming as a direct result of this killing of the Messiah. This is the vindication of Messiah. Let's go on. The importance of Daniel chapter 9 for understanding the millennium, I believe, can hardly be overemphasized. Skeptics claim, most, quote, liberal scholars claim that Daniel was written what they call ex eventu, after the events that it's talking about. And the reason I say that is because they don't believe there's such a thing as actual inspired prophecy. Men wrote things after events took place, and to make it appear that they were prophets, they wrote about them as if they had not yet happened. I always call that lying. John Collins, fantastic scholar. I love to read him. But John Collins, in his hermeneutic commentary on the book of Daniel, goes through Daniel chapter 11. He says, well, this is this, and this is all right, and this is accurate here. And at this particular point in Revelation chapter 11, the prophet begins speaking a genuine prophecy, and the reason we know it's a genuine prophecy is because it failed. Now, there's a criteria for identifying a true prophet, isn't it? John Collins is recognized as one of the greatest scholars on Daniel alive in the world today. Yet for him, the sign of a true prophet is that his prophecies never came true. I'm sorry, that's messed up. Now, conservative Jews, and I'm very good friends with one of the leading Hebrew scholars in the world who lives in Israel. Two of his sons are leading rabbis in Israel. I get to ask him all sorts of wonderful questions. But he is a practicing Jew, a conservative Jew, and he tells me emphatically, modern conservative Jews do not consider Daniel to be a true prophet. You know why? Now, this is not what he said, but this is what it comes down to. They don't consider Daniel to be a prophet because if you admit Daniel was a genuine prophet, that must mean that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That's what that amounts to. Daniel 9 is in many ways the very foundation of dispensationalism, I'm sure as you know, with the posit that there's a 2,000-year postponement gap between the 69th and the 70th week. But I want you to notice that Daniel 9 serves as a great fountain for understanding the book of Revelation. Daniel 9 is concerned with the fate of the holy city where the Messiah would be cut off, just like the holy city, which is where the Lord was crucified, Revelation chapter 11, would be trodden down for 42 months. Guess what? That's the last 3.5 weeks. 3.5 days, of Daniel. Chapter 9, 70 weeks. Daniel 9 is focused on the appointed time. 70 weeks are determined. I'll get to that more in a moment. And the end of the appointed time, the Suntelius Kairu. Greek word kairos. Mike mentioned it. I will too. Just like Revelation is focused on the appointed time, the kairos, the time of the judgment of the city where the Lord was crucified. Daniel 9 speaks emphatically of the war for killing Messiah. Well, guess what Revelation has talked about? The judgment of the city where the Lord was crucified. And that killed the prophets, by the way. You got two witnesses, right? They're prophets. They're slain. Jerusalem is destroyed. Daniel chapter 9 predicted the resurrection. How so? Because it prophesied of the bringing in of the world of everlasting righteousness. Now, it's really interesting to me. On October the 12th, I will be debating a world-renowned atheist. He's one of the most well-known atheist historians in the world. His name is Richard Carrier. And he says that Daniel chapter 9 foretold the resurrection. When I heard him say that, I'm going, yeah, oh, this is good. I like this. I agree with that. I wrote a book on it, 70 Weeks Are Determined for the Resurrection. I think he's absolutely true. Of course, Richard Carrier believes that Daniel lied. Daniel was a false prophet. How do we know he's a false prophet? Because the prophecy failed. No, it didn't. So here is Daniel 9 predicting the resurrection, predicting the new creation, the world of everlasting righteousness. So 2 Peter chapter 3, according to his promise, we look for a new heaven and new earth wherein dwells everlasting righteousness. That's Daniel 9, that's Isaiah 65 and Isaiah chapter 66. And in Daniel, that time of everlasting righteousness, that time of the resurrection, that time of the new creation was far off. Well, how do I know that? Well, because it was 490 years away. 70 weeks are determined. It doesn't say, Daniel, the resurrection is just around the corner. The coming of the Lord is at hand. And when people tell me God cannot tell time, I'm suggesting they're the ones that cannot tell God's time. The problem is they don't want to accept God's calendar. But to go on. In Revelation, in stark contrast to Daniel chapter 9, what do we have? These things must shortly come to pass. Revelation chapter 1, verse 3, the time, kairos. I tell you, folks, Mike hinted at it. The word kairos is one of the most significant words in all of the Bible. It truly is. In that book, Resurrection Feast Fulfilled, it's on the table. I don't know, it may be sold out, I don't know. But the point of fact is, I've got an entire chapter devoted to the study of the Greek word kairos. It is divinely appointed time. The Old Testament over and over and over spoke of the last days, and they spoke of appointed times in the last days. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 22, at its appointed time, kairos, I will bring it to pass swiftly. So in the last days, and when the appointed time for the new heaven and new earth of Isaiah chapter 60 arrived, God would bring its fulfillment to pass swiftly. Appointed time. Do yourself a favor. You don't have to buy the book. Just do yourself a favor and do the study of kairos. I mean, we appreciate it if you buy the book. That's great and fine. But you got to study the word kairos. So in Daniel, the appointed time, the kairos is far off. But in Revelation, it is the appointed time, has arrived. It's in the perfect tense in the Greek, which means we're living, from John's perspective, we're living at the appointed time. Now, look very closely. Jan, what is my time? Am I? I've got that long? Okay. I'll try to hurry here. Dave, I don't think I'm going to be talking about the feast days. In Daniel 9, verse 26, I want you to notice, desolations are determined until the end of the war. And again, this is ton polemon. The war extends to the end of the appointed time, the 70 weeks. The end of the 70 weeks is when the new creation of righteousness would arrive. Well, in Revelation, we find the war, again, Revelation 11, 16, 19, chapter 20, which would fulfill the Old Covenant prophets, which would include Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 12, both of which foretold the kairos, the suntelia to kairu, the consummation of the appointed time. And you're going to see the power of that here momentarily. So, at the end of the war, which is what? The end of the millennium, Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8, the new creation arrives. This is where it starts getting really good in my estimation. The promise of the bringing in of everlasting righteousness in Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24 is the time of the new creation. That's what it says. But the bringing in of everlasting righteousness of Daniel 9 is confined to the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9. That's what it says. You can't get the arrival of the everlasting world of righteousness outside of the 70 weeks. I had somebody try to argue that, and I'm going, where did you get this? He didn't tell me where he got it. It was a figment of his imagination. So the 70 weeks ended no later than AD 70 because it ends with the war against Jerusalem. Therefore, the fulfillment of the end of the millennium, new creation of Revelation 20 through 21, was fulfilled no later than AD 70. But let me drive it home even more. I want to take a look at the Septuagint. Now, I've had people tell me, oh, you shouldn't pay any attention to the Septuagint. Well, here's the fact. I believe, personally, that the Septuagint provides definitive proof for the end of the 70 weeks. By the way, the Septuagint was Luke's favorite Old Testament source to quote. He quotes it far, far, far more than he does the Masoretic. Okay, this is a direct quote as a result of the Google search. Quote, it has been estimated that in the Greek New Testament, it quotes directly from the Septuagint in 340 places, whereas it only quotes the Hebrew and what would later become known as the Masoretic text 33 times. Now, does that tell you anything about how trustworthy the New Testament writers believed the Septuagint was? Now, are there some places in which you might shake your head and go, I don't know about that? Well, probably. I'm not a Septuagint scholar by any means, but I know what the New Testament writer does when it's quoting, and it quotes the Septuagint way more than it does the Masoretic text. So my point is, since the New Testament writers quoted the Septuagint literally hundreds times more than they did the Masoretic text, this is powerful testimony as to its importance. Now, why do I say this? Because I want to set the context for understanding the text of Daniel chapter 9. Well, that's bigger print than I'm looking at. So anyway, 70 weeks are determined on your people and on your city. The word determined is from, as I pointed out a while ago, from the Hebrew word katash. I undoubtedly butchered the pronunciation. Please forgive me. Which means cut out. You can just think of a linear line of time, and God said, from here to here is the time that I have determined, that I have cut out for the accomplishment of the 6 constituent elements of Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. The 70 weeks was God's, therefore, divinely appointed time to accomplish all 6 of those constituent elements on the people and on the holy city. Now watch this in Daniel 9, 26 and 27. Are we still dealing with the people and the city? Well, of course we are. Okay, here we are. This is terrible. In the temple, I know what it says, I'm trying to read it. In the temple, the abomination of desolation will be set up. All right? The abomination of desolation, literally in both the Hebrew and in the Greek, means the abomination that would bring desolation or that would cause desolation. I want to suggest to you, I want to propose that the abomination that causes desolation had to be some sin on the part of Israel. It's not the pagans. The pagans were going to bring the desolation. Israel was going to cause or be the source of the abomination. Put it like that, because I think that's incredibly important. Now, the writer says, and in the temple, and in there should be the abomination of desolation. Now watch this. And at the end of the time, once again, we're dealing with some definite articles that are very important. At the end of the time, an end shall be made of the desolation. What is the appointed time? 70 weeks. Right? Everybody with me? At the end of the appointed time, at the end of the 70 weeks, an end shall be put to the desolations. Now, the appointed time is from tis centulius kairu, the appointed time. The consummation or the consummation of the appointed time. So note, Daniel does not say or indicate the end of time. It is the end of the appointed time. The only appointed time in the text is the 70 weeks. So, notice very carefully. It's a repetition, but you really, really do have to catch the power of this. The end of the appointed time would be at the end of the desolation of the city and the sanctuary. The end of the 70 weeks and the end of the desolations are synchronous. Now, it's universally admitted among conservatives that Daniel 9:26, the destruction of the city and the sanctuary, was in AD 70. The end of the appointed time, the kairos and teleos, that is, the end of the cut out time, would be during the war, the time of the desolations. There is no other appointed time of desolations in the entire context. When the only appointed time of desolation is the destruction of Jerusalem, the war, etc., when that's the only appointed time mentioned, and therefore the end of the appointed time would bring the end of the desolations, then that absolutely means that the end of the appointed time of the 70 weeks would be at the end of the war, AD 70. Not at the beginning of the war, and it's very, very popular. I say very, very popular. It's very popular in some circles for it to be said that, well, the end of the 70 weeks was in AD 34 and 35. I've tried to hold that position in earlier times, but it won't work. If the end of desolation is at the end of the war, or the appointed time, excuse me, and the end of the appointed time, the end of the 70 weeks, brings the end of the desolations. Guess what, folks? There were no desolations in AD 34 or 35. End of story. Not only that, there were no desolations in 66 AD. The end of the appointed time brings an end to the desolations. You cannot have the end of the 70 weeks at a time period when there were no desolations taking place. I think I'm basically out of time, but let me very, very quickly. No, I won't. No, I won't do that. I will close on this. In Daniel 9, we have the end time fate of Israel. 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city, just like Daniel chapter 12 is the end time fate of Israel. In Daniel chapter 9, we have the time, or the end of the appointed time, Suntalia Kairu, just like Daniel chapter 12 and verse 4. We have the Suntalia Kairu, the time of the appointed end, and the time, or the end of the appointed time. Daniel chapter 9, we have the time of the abomination of desolation, and we have the great tribulation, just like we do in Daniel chapter 12. In Daniel chapter 9, we have the fulfillment at the end of the time of the appointed time and the consummation of the appointed time, just like Daniel chapter 12. We have the prophecy of the resurrection, which is the fulfillment of Sukkot, the resurrection feast. We have the prophecy of the resurrection, or the fulfillment of the destruction of the city and of the temple, just like in Daniel chapter 12, we have the prediction of the destruction of the power of the holy people. Let me close on this. You know, it's amazing, and I've said this a whole lot. I presented this lesson in my office. I had it down to 58 minutes, all right? My clock was really messed up. Okay, I want to suggest to you in closing that the points presented here are powerful, powerful probative proof that the end of the 70 weeks was in the first century. Daniel 9 had to be and was fulfilled while the law of Moses and the feast days of Israel were still fully in effect, and Israel was God's covenant people. Daniel 9 had to be fulfilled in the covenantal judgment of Israel for filling up the measure of her sin, which Jesus posited for the first century. Daniel 9 had to be fulfilled, or was fulfilled, in AD 70, destruction of Jerusalem at the consummation of the appointed time and the end of the desolations. The end of the appointed time would bring, as I've already said, the desolations, the war, to an end. So the implications of this are absolutely profound. The implications of our study present the following. Number one, the current Israeli-Arabic Hamas conflict is totally misguided. It is a tragedy and a travesty beyond description. Number two, that land over which they're fighting doesn't belong to anyone by divine right anymore. And it means that Israel, the nation calling themselves Israel, is no longer God's covenant chosen people. It means that there is no future Jerusalem temple. They can talk about all these red heifers that they want to. They're just a bunch of red cows, fit for slaughter, hamburger, whatever. There is no future abomination of desolation. There is no future great tribulation. I'll be talking about that tomorrow. And it means that the new heaven and new earth, wherein dwells righteousness, where man can be in a righteous, holy, eternal relationship with God, is now our reality. And finally, there is a constant and consistent thread concerning the war, as I think I've demonstrated. In all of the context concerning the war, we have found the following. They are dealing with the last days, they are dealing with the avenging of the martyrs, and they are dealing with the judgment of Old Covenant Jerusalem. So unless one can prove definitively that the connections that I have made are invalid, and that there are in fact very many last days, the wars, for the purpose of avenging the martyrs, including the prophets, at the coming of the Lord, I want to suggest to you that this presentation proves beyond a doubt the end of the millennium was in the first century. Thank you very much.